Welcome to Dragon Ball Quantum Infinite Perfection. Thank you for taking the time to read my fanfiction or listen to this sample. This story is a unique exploration of the Dragon Ball universe where new challenges, powerful new warriors, and unexpected twists await our beloved heroes. Set in an alternate timeline where Android 16 survived instead of Goku and Vegeta, the story delves into what might happen if teenage Gohan was allowed to continue training after defeating Cell. Android 16 is able to help Gohan break through his limits through training, but for some reason, Shenron is unable to bring Goku and Vegeta back from the afterlife. What is going on? This fanfiction is dedicated to Akira Toriyama, the genius behind Dragon Ball, whose creative brilliance has inspired countless fans and stories. Without him, none of this would be possible. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow fans. Your support means the world, and it helps keep the Dragon Ball legacy alive. The ground was still smoking from the devastation of the final battle. The skies, once streaked with energy blasts and beams of destruction, were eerily quiet. The world had been saved again, but at what cost? Gohan stood panting heavily, his clothes torn and dirty from the intense battle. His heart was racing, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He looked down at the crater where the remains of Cell had been fallen. Gohan's eyes narrowed with focus, as if expecting the creature to rise once again. But there was no movement, no sign of life. It was finally over. He could not regenerate. And yet, the weight of the victory felt hollow. Beside him, Android 16 stood tall, his massive form seemingly unaffected by the chaos that had unfolded. His expression, ever neutral, had softened ever so slightly. He watched over Gohan like a silent guardian, his presence comforting, though not loud or intrusive. Gohan's fingers trembled as he wiped his forehead, trying to shake off the remnants of that fight. But his mind was elsewhere, on the people who were no longer here to witness this moment. His father Goku and Vegeta, the heroes who had fought so hard, but who had ultimately perished in the wake of Cell's terror. The loss weighed on Gohan's chest like a stone. "You did it, Gohan." The voice of Android 16 broke through his spiraling thoughts. Gohan didn't answer at first. He couldn't. The words didn't seem to do justice to the emptiness he had felt. There was no joy in victory when it was bittersweet. He had saved the earth, but the price had been too high. His father Goku was gone, taken from him far too soon, and Vegeta, the one who had always pushed him, always challenged him, was gone as well. "I couldn't save them," Gohan whispered, his voice heavy with grief. Android 16 tilted his head slightly, his mechanical gaze softening. "You were not meant to save them, Gohan. Your mission was to protect the future. That is what you have done." Gohan clenched his fists. The words made sense, but they didn't bring him the peace he so desperately craved. Instead, his grief boiled over into frustration. "I couldn't even protect my father." 16 stood still, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then his voice came again, gentle yet firm. "Your father chose his path. He knew the risks, but he never hesitated because he believed in the power of life and love. You should honor his memory by living, not by dwelling in sorrow." Gohan turned to face the android, his eyes filled with both pain and confusion. I don't know if I can live up to that, 16. How can I be like him? How can I? You can start by understanding that his strength came not just from his power, but from his heart, 16 interrupted. You carry that same heart, Gohan. That is your true strength. Before Gohan could respond, a voice echoed from behind them. Well, looks like we survived after all. Piccolo approached from the distance, his face as grim as ever, though there was a hint of pride in his eyes. Good work, Gohan. You handled yourself well. Gohan gave a small nod, but it didn't reach his eyes. Thanks, Piccolo. The Namekian stopped beside him, his gaze briefly flicking to the lifeless form of Cell. Now that the fight's over, what happens next? Gohan's brow furrowed. I don't know. I feel like I should be doing more. Like there's no time to rest, but it's all so empty without Dad here. Without Vegeta. Piccolo placed a hand on Gohan's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. You'll find your way, Gohan. You will always do. But if you need help finding it, I'll be here. Gohan met his mentor's gaze, but before he could speak, the familiar voice of Bulma called out. Gohan, are you alright? Chi-Chi and Bulma approached them, Bulma holding Trunks' hand and Chi-Chi holding her stomach. She was pregnant. I'm okay, Mom, Gohan said softly, though his words lacked the conviction that usually accompanied them. There was a brief silence as Chi-Chi and Bulma let go, her expression softening as she took in Gohan's downcast face. I know this is hard, sweetheart, she said, her voice gentle, but we can't give up, not now. Your father would never want that. Gohan didn't answer. The weight of everything, his father's death, the responsibility of protecting the earth, the grief was too much. He could feel the emotions building, but he swallowed them down, focusing on his mother's words instead. Bulma's voice broke through again, this time more resolute. I've been thinking about what comes next, Gohan. I want you to train. Right, Chi-Chi? Yeah, I want you to be ready for whatever comes. You're the strongest fighter left, and you have so much potential. She smiled sadly. I know you don't like the idea of training, but your father and Vegeta, they would have wanted you to keep going. Gohan nodded slowly. The decision didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something he had to do, as it was the only way to honor his father's memory, to live up to the legacy that Goku had left behind. I'll train, Mom, Gohan said, his voice firmer now. I'll do it for them. Piccolo stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. I'll help you, Gohan. We can train together. I know you've gotten stronger, but you can go further. You always could. We can pick up where your father left off. Gohan hesitated. Training with Piccolo again felt comforting, but something about it didn't sit right. He had always trained under Piccolo for so long. Maybe he needed something different this time. Before Gohan could respond, another voice interrupted them, this time deep and calm, like the rumble of distant thunder. I'll train him. Gohan, Bulma, and Piccolo turned in surprise. Standing tall, as if he had always been meant to be here, was Android 16. His gaze was steady and unwavering, yet there was something else in his expression now, a quiet resolve, a commitment. 16, Gohan asked, his voice full of surprise and confusion. Why would you want to train me? 16 stepped forward, his large, imposing frame casting a shadow over the group. Because you need more than strength, Gohan. You need stability. Your father was powerful, but his true strength lay in his understanding of the heart, I can help you find that balance. Piccolo crossed his arms, eyeing 16 skeptically. And you think Gohan should train with you instead of me? 16's response was calm and unshaken. I don't think it's a matter of instead. You have been an excellent mentor, Piccolo, but Gohan needs something different now. He needs someone who can guide him not just in battle, but in understanding his place in the world. I can offer that, if you will allow me. Gohan looked between 16 and Piccolo. He felt a tug in his chest, a sense of loyalty to both. Piccolo had been his mentor ever since he was a child. And 16 had always been a protector. The android had never once treated him like a weapon or a tool. He treated him like a person. I want to train with you, 16, Gohan said quietly. I think you're right. Piccolo raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Bulma, though, gave a small, approving smile. If it feels right to you, Gohan, then I trust your decision. Gohan turned to 16. Thank you, 16. I don't know what to expect, but I think you're the right person to help me. Android 16's expression softened just slightly. Then let's begin. There's much to learn, Gohan, and we'll do it together. The winds shifted, carrying with them the promise of new beginnings. Gohan was no longer the child who had been thrust into battle. He was a teenage warrior and a protector, and now, with Android 16 by his side, he would learn not just to fight, but to understand the true meaning of strength. The warm, golden light of late afternoon spilled across the landscape outside the San's family home. The air was filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds, as though the world itself had paused to watch what was about to unfold. A few feet away from the house, Gohan stood in his Super Saiyan 2 form, his golden hair spiked and crackling with raw energy. His body hummed with power, and his expression was focused, determined. He had been training for hours, and today he would push himself harder than ever before. Standing across from him was Android 16, a towering figure of mechanical precision, calm, unflinching, and as steady as the mountains in the distance. 16 regarded Gohan with the same stoic expression he always wore. His massive form was imposing, but it was his quiet, unyielding nature that made him a formidable opponent. Chi-Chi, Gohan's mother, was nearby, tending to the garden. She had been doing household chores all afternoon, but her eyes frequently drifted toward the clearing where her son and the android sparred. Her hands rested lightly on her growing belly, pregnant with Goten, and for a moment she allowed herself to close her eyes, listening to the sound of her son's energy crackling in the air. The house had been quieter without Goku, and though she was proud of her son's strength, her heart ached for the missing piece of her family. Alright, 16, let's see if I can get a bit faster this time. Gohan's voice broke through the silence, a playful edge to it, despite the intensity in his eyes. Understood, Gohan. I will not hold back. 16's voice was calm as always, devoid of emotion. He shifted his weight slightly, his gaze never leaving Gohan. Gohan nodded, and in a flash he was gone. His body was a blur. He reappeared in front of 16 in an instant, aiming a fierce right hook at the android's face. The punch was fast, but 16's mechanical reflexes were even faster. His hand shot out, catching Gohan's fist midair. You are faster, but your movements are still predictable. 16's voice remained unchanged as he gripped Gohan's fist firmly, unmoved. Gohan's eyes narrowed. Predictable, huh? Let's see about that. Without a moment's hesitation, Gohan spun his body, pulling his fist back and launching a swift kick toward 16's side. The android sidestepped effortlessly, the kick grazing his metal exterior but not landing a solid blow. Impressive speed, but you must refine your strategy, 16 said. Gohan landed lightly on his feet, a small smile tugging at his lips. He exhaled deeply, already preparing himself for another round. Thinking ahead is easier said than done. And just like that, he was gone again. His body blurred once more, and in the blink of an eye, he reappeared behind 16. A rapid flurry of punches rained down on the android's back, each one aimed with surgical precision, but 16 didn't flinch. His body remained as still as a statue under the barrage, his movements too calculated to be shaken by Gohan's speed. Without warning, 16's hand shot out, grabbing Gohan's wrist mid-punch. He spun around in one smooth motion, throwing Gohan high into the air with a force that made the earth tremble. You rely too much on raw speed. You must think 2 steps ahead. 16's voice was still calm, still unaffected, but there was a subtle undercurrent of something, an acknowledgement of Gohan's strength perhaps, or the challenge he presented. Gohan flipped gracefully in midair, landing softly on the ground with barely a skid. His eyes burned with renewed intensity, and a small grin spread across his face. I'll do more than that, Gohan shouted, powering up with a burst of energy. His aura flared around him like a violent storm, the golden blue fire crackling and sizzling in the air. The earth beneath him trembled with the force of his energy. Chi-Chi paused her gardening, her head turning toward the clearing. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, feeling the soft stir of her unborn son. She watched Gohan for a long moment, her gaze soft but troubled. She had seen him grow from the sweet innocent boy into this powerful warrior, but sometimes, just sometimes, she wished he didn't have to carry the weight of so much. The absence of Goku, her husband, Gohan's father, was a constant ache in her heart, a wound that would never fully heal. Gohan, you're gonna blow something up again, she called out in a mix of concern and exasperation, though there was no anger in her words. But Gohan didn't hear her. He was already launching himself at 16 with a roar, his power surging higher than before, faster than before. His movements became more erratic, more unpredictable. As he pushed his limits, he threw punch after punch, his speed and ferocity growing with each attack, his energy crackling in the air like a storm. The ground shook with every strike. 16's eyes never wavered. With mechanical precision, he blocked and dodged, his movements fluid and calculated. He wasn't simply defending, he was studying, learning, adapting. And when Gohan's barrage slowed for just a fraction of a second, 16 seized the opportunity. In an instant, 16 was on him. His massive hand shot out, grabbing Gohan's fist-missed punch again. The android spun, sending Gohan hurling into the air once more, but this time he didn't stop. He reappeared above 16, gathering energy into the palms of his hands. With a fierce cry, Kamehameha, the familiar sound of Gohan's most trusted technique filled the air, his energy gathering into a brilliant ball of blue light. It expanded in his hands until it was massive, almost too large for him to control, but his determination was unwavering. 16 stood firm, his expression neutral, his posture unmoving. That technique again? 16's voice was almost amused, though his tone remained stoic. You've become too reliant on it. Gohan's eyes narrowed. Don't underestimate me, 16. With a deafening roar, Gohan released the Kamehameha wave, and the world seemed to tremble as the massive energy beam rocketed toward 16, obliterating everything in its path. The sky lit up, the earth shaking beneath the blast. The beam shot forward like a comet, a streak of unyielding power. Chi-Chi's heart skipped a beat as she looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Gohan. She whispered his name softly, a mixture of pride and worry in her voice. But 16 was already prepared. With mechanical precision, he raised his hand, generating a massive energy shield to meet the oncoming blast. The two forces collided with the violent explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the surrounding trees and ground splitting beneath the impact. Gohan hovered midair, breathing heavily, his golden aura flickering still. He looked down at 16, who was still standing in the same spot, his energy shield slowly dissipating, the dust around them settling. Not bad, Gohan said in between breaths, a faint grin on his face. 16 lowered his hand, the remnants of his shield vanishing. You are pushing your limits well, but you still have much to learn. Gohan's smirk widened. I'll get there. I'll keep pushing until I'm ready. For everyone. From below, Chi-Chi looked up at her son, her expression softening, the pride in her eyes undeniable. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of life within. Her heart swelled with love, but there was also something else, a quiet sadness. Goku was still gone, and her family wasn't whole. She could only hope that, wherever he was, he could see what Gohan had become. Just like your father, she whispered to herself, the words barely audible above the wind. I hope you can see this, Goku. How strong he's become. How much he's caring for all of us. And as the sky grew darker, Gohan continued his training, pushing himself further, determined to become the man his family needed, the warrior they deserved. The sun was sinking low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet yard as the evening settled in. The air was cooler now, a refreshing breeze brushing through the trees, but the residue of the intense training still clung to Gohan. His aura had faded, his golden hair returning to its natural black state as he powered down from Super Saiyan 2. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his body sore but satisfied with the day's progress. Android 16, ever the silent observer, was already headed towards the house, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the grass. Gohan stretched, his muscles aching, but his mind was focused on something far more important now. Dinner. His stomach growled audibly, reminding him that while training was a good outlet for his energy, it didn't always fill him up. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Chi-Chi bustling around in the kitchen. The smells of rice, vegetables, and something sweet, maybe one of her famous stews, filled the air, a comfort to Gohan's senses. He didn't need to be told twice that it was time to eat. Gohan glanced over at 16, who was watching him with his usual calm demeanor. I'll set the table. You can relax for a bit, Gohan said with a smile, his voice still a bit breathless from the sparring. He didn't have much else to say. 16, with his quiet nature, would follow without a word. Chi-Chi, meanwhile, was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she moved from stove to counter, preparing the last touches of their meal. Her movements were efficient, but there was a slight weariness to them, an exhaustion that she hadn't yet shaken off. Maybe it was the baby or just the weight of running the household alone in Goku's absence, but it was clear she was more tired than she let on. As Chi-Chi moved toward the dining table with a pot in hand, she misstepped. Her foot caught the edge of the rug, and she let out a startled gasp. The pot tipped dangerously in her hands. "Mom!" Gohan shouted, his voice sharp with concern, but he was too far. And before she could lose her balance completely, a large hand shot out to steady her. Android 16's expression remained as impassive as ever, but there was a tenderness in the way he supported her. His mechanical hand, warm despite its metallic exterior, gently gripped her arm, preventing her from stumbling. "Careful, Chi-Chi," 16 said, his voice deep, as calm as ever, though there was a touch of concern buried within it. Chi-Chi straightened herself, her face flushed with embarrassment, but grateful for the android's intervention. She looked up at him with a soft smile, relieved. "Thank you, 16. I guess I'm getting a bit clumsy in my old age," she said, trying to make light of the situation. But there was a slight tremble in her voice, a hint of fatigue she couldn't quite hide. 16 gave a single nod, his usual stoic gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual before stepping back. "You are welcome. Is there anything else I can assist with?" Chi-Chi hesitated for a moment, glancing at the counter full of ingredients, and then back at 16. She chuckled softly. "I think I've got everything handled for tonight, thank you. You've already done enough." Gohan, who had been standing nearby, moved over to the table and began setting it, his hands quick and efficient. He placed plates and utensils down, his movements calm and purposeful, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He glanced up at his mother, watching her, her hand still resting lightly on her belly as if she were taking a moment to center herself. He could see the quiet fatigue in her face, the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. He didn't say anything, but he knew she was trying to carry it all. Her worries, her responsibilities, and the growing life within her. "Mom, why don't you take a seat?" Gohan said after a moment, his voice soft but firm. "I'll finish up here. You don't have to do everything." Chi-Chi looked over at him, her eyes softening. She had been so used to doing everything herself, especially since Goku's disappearance. The idea of letting someone else, let alone her son, take over seemed difficult, but there was no denying she was worn out. The weight of it all, especially with the second child on the way, was heavy. "You're right," Chi-Chi said after a beat, her voice quieter now. She let out a small sigh, and her lips curved into a grateful smile. "Thank you, Gohan." With a slow nod, she made her way to the nearby chair and sank down into it, resting her hands on her stomach as she looked at Gohan. "I've been running around all day. It's nice to have a moment to just sit and relax." Gohan gave her a gentle smile, his eyes showing both affection and concern. As he placed the final dish on the table, a steaming bowl of rice, he made his way to the chair across from her, sitting down as well, the faint sound of his body stretching and his muscles relaxing after the training filled the otherwise quiet room. Android 16 stood by the window, silently observing the scene. He didn't need to be invited to join the meal, and he knew his presence, while helpful, was often a reminder of the power that lurked beneath his calm exterior. But for now he respected the moment. Chi-Chi, looking up at him, gave a small nod of approval. "Go ahead and sit, 16. You've earned it. You've been helping Gohan push his limits all afternoon. You deserve a proper meal." Even though 16 was an android, he didn't mind eating. His gaze flicked to her, the faintest indication of recognition in his eyes. Without a word, he moved to the chair at the far end of the table and sat down, his massive form looking slightly out of place among the more human-sized furniture. But there was something about the quiet, steady presence he had brought to the table that gave Chi-Chi a sense of reassurance. "Thank you," 16 said simply. The three of them sat down together at the table. The only sound in the room, the soft clink of chopsticks and the gentle hum of conversation. The evening was peaceful, a rare quiet moment in the chaos of their lives. As Gohan helped his mother serve the food, there was a certain calm that settled over them, a moment of tranquility in a world that so often felt unpredictable. Chi-Chi smiled softly, looking at her son and the android who had become a part of their lives. Though things weren't perfect, and the absence of Goku still loomed large over them, she could feel a sense of warmth in her chest. Family had a way of coming together, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. As they ate together, the world outside faded away. For just a moment, there was no fighting, no training, no endless struggle to protect the future. There was only family, and for Chi-Chi, that was enough. The morning sun was still low in the sky, casting its gentle golden rays through the trees and making the leaves shimmer with life. The air was crisp and cool, with the faintest hint of dew on the grass. Birds chirped cheerfully in the distance, and the hum of nature filled the forest surrounding the San family home. It was perfect. It was a perfect, quiet morning, a welcome reprieve after all the intense training of the previous day. Gohan and Android 16 walked side by side through the woods, their footsteps soft on the earth beneath them. Gohan's movements were relaxed now, no longer tense from the earlier battle. His senses were more attuned to the world around him, his thoughts a little less clouded than they had been before. For the first time in a long time, he found himself able to just breathe. They weren't sparring today. There would be no fierce combat, no roaring energy beams. Instead, they walked in silence for a while, taking in the serenity of the forest. Gohan had always appreciated the beauty of nature, the way the trees seemed to stand unmoving, the wind whispering through the branches, the harmony that existed in the wild. But today, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, the stillness felt different, deeper. After a few moments, it was Android 16 who spoke first, his voice as measured and calm as the slow, deliberate pace of his steps. "You know, Gohan, the balance of nature is much like the balance of life itself. There is a delicate equilibrium between forces that create order and those that bring chaos." Gohan turned his head slightly, intrigued. It wasn't the first time 16 had shared his wisdom, but today the words felt like they carried more weight. "What do you mean by that?" Gohan asked, genuinely curious. Android 16's gaze seemed to drift upward, as though he were taking in the world in a way that transcended the mere physical. His towering frame loomed over Gohan, yet there was something profoundly peaceful about his presence, something almost otherworldly. "Consider the trees," 16 began, his voice a quiet rumble. "They grow tall and strong, their roots deep in the earth, providing shelter for countless forms of life. Yet in order for them to grow, they must reach toward the sun, bending to the forces of nature. The earth, in turn, provides the nutrients they need, giving them the strength to survive." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But without the wind, without the storm, the trees would not be tested. It is the chaos of the elements, rain, wind, fire, that shapes them, making them stronger. Without it, they would remain fragile, unable to withstand the trials of fire. Gohan looked at 16 thoughtfully. So you're saying that even in chaos, there's a kind of order? Precisely, 16 replied. Chaos does not destroy everything it touches. Rather, it forces change, growth, adaptation. In the same way that a warrior must push beyond their limits to become stronger, the forest thrives by enduring the chaos of its environment. The balance between order and chaos is not always visible, but it is always present. Gohan absorbed the android's words, feeling the weight of them in a way that felt almost spiritual. He had always been told that balance was important, that he needed to keep his strength under control, that peace was the ultimate goal. But this was different. There was an understanding here that resonated with him on a deeper level. So, it's like us? Gohan asked after a moment. The fighting, the training, it's like a storm that helps us grow stronger. But without that storm, we wouldn't really know what we're capable of. 16's face, as usual, remained impassive, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in his gaze. Yes, Gohan. Life itself is a series of challenges and conflicts. The storm of battle, the trials you face, they are not inherently evil. It is how you respond to them that defines you. A warrior must find that balance within themselves, learn to harness the chaos without letting it consume them. Gohan took a deep breath, his mind working through the android's words. There had always been so much pressure on him to be the protector, the one to maintain peace, but sometimes peace meant avoiding conflict, avoiding change, avoiding growth. Yet without the constant push of his training, his fights and his struggles, where would he be? How would he have learned? How would he have become the person he was now? There's a lot more to being strong than just power, huh? Gohan asked quietly, more to himself than 16. Android 16 looked down at him, the faintest glimmer of something like approval in his eyes. True strength, Gohan, is not measured by the number of battles you fight or the power you unleash. Strength is about wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to step back, knowing when to show mercy and when to take action. Gohan nodded slowly, the weight of 16's words settling on him like a cloak. I never thought about it that way before. I've always just focused on winning, on defeating the enemy. But maybe it's more than that. It is, 16 agreed. A true warrior is defined not by the battles they fight, but how they learn and grow from them. The greatest warriors are those who understand their place in the world and the role they must play. They know that their actions have consequences, not only for themselves, but for those around them. True balance comes when a warrior can acknowledge their own limitations and use their power wisely. Gohan glanced up at 16, a small spark of understanding lighting his eyes. He had always felt the weight of his father's legacy, the expectation that he would be the one to save the world. But now, in this quiet moment, with 16's guidance, Gohan began to see the larger picture. It wasn't just about saving others, it was about understanding life itself, the balance between light and dark, order and chaos, strength and wisdom. You make it sound like being a protector is more about knowing when not to fight, Gohan said, his voice thoughtful. Indeed, 16 said, his gaze turning back towards the horizon, where the first rays of the sun were beginning to illuminate the forest. The world is full of forces beyond our understanding, but wisdom lies in knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to accept the chaos, and in that acceptance we find peace. Gohan's expression softened as he stood there, taking in the serenity of the morning. He had always been told that that power was the key to protecting others, but now, for the first time, he realized that true power wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about understanding the world and finding balance within it. It was about knowing when to step back and listen, when to allow growth to happen, and when to protect what mattered most. As he looked up at the towering figure of Android 16, Gohan felt a deep sense of gratitude. The android was more than just a sparring partner or a protector. He was a mentor, someone who helped him see the bigger picture, who guided him not just in combat but in life itself. For the first time in a long time, Gohan felt like he was on the right path. One that wasn't just about being strong, but about being wise. "I understand now," Gohan said softly, his voice filled with newfound conviction. "I've still got a lot to learn, but I think I'm ready to start." Android 16 nodded. A small, almost imperceptible gesture turned to face the horizon once more. "Then take what you have learned today, Gohan, and carry it with you. The balance between chaos and order is not just in nature, it is within you. And when you find it, you will truly understand what it means to be strong." The two of them stood in silence for a moment longer, the gentle rustling of the wind only sound between them. The forest was alive, the world around them ever changing, and Gohan knew that his journey, both in battle and in wisdom, was just beginning. Alright everyone, that was the prelude chapter. I'll put the link in the description for the full fanfic. There's 7 other chapters, all roughly with around 4,000-ish words. There are some mistakes. I know I made a lot, like the lifeless cell body. He would just regenerate, right? So I'm gonna close that. What is that called? Like a loophole or whatever. I'm gonna close that in the second series, if I do a second series. But I had fun writing this for NaNoWriMo. Last time I participated in NaNoWriMo was 2 years ago with an Attack on Titan fanfic, and now I got this fanfic. I feel like my writing skills are getting a little better. And this microphone sounds a lot nicer. So let me know what you guys think. You can watch some of these fights with Super Boo. I won't explain why there's Super Boo there, but you'll find out if you read the rest of the story or whatever. It's not that long. It's only 40,000 words. But yeah, if you made it this far, go ahead and like, subscribe, share, and let me know what you think about it. It's supposed to be a good story for like Teen Gohan fans. So if you like Teen Gohan and you wanted to know more about Android 16, then this story is all for you.
I'll never forgive you! you suffer.